welcome. Well, my name is Dan Dangerfield, and I'm from Wilson, North Dakota. And I want to share with you and talk to you the idea of serving and showing honor. There's a quote from Arthur Ashe, famous tennis player, American figure, and he says, "True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost." And when we think about serving in the role that we are in, we often think of, if I was to ask you, who's God called you to serve? Who's God called you to reach out to and minister and just serve in the place that you're at and the calling on your life? If we were to go through the room, many of us would say answers like, God has called us to the children of our church. God has called us to the families, to the parents of our church. God has called us to our community. God has called us to the city and to the church that we're at. And these would be common answers, but it would be a tragedy if we would list off a bunch of answers and not list what I would say one of the most important people that we serve. Our senior pastor, our lead pastor, is who I would say that him or her, that person should be at the top of our list of who we are there, who God has called us to serve. As much as you have been called to your church, as much as you have been called to your community, you have been called to your pastor. You have been called to serve him or her. And the anointing that God has placed on your life for that church, for that community, for you, this time, God has also anointed your pastor to be at that church, at that community, and to lead during this time. And I want to challenge us. The question I would ask you today is, what's your serve? How do you honor? What's your serve? How do you honor? In what ways do you serve your senior pastor? In what ways do you lighten your senior pastor's role? In what ways do you make his or her job easier? What's your serve? How do you honor? I would like to offer 3 ways that we can show our senior pastors honor, 3 ways that we can serve our senior pastors. And I would love to tell you that these 3 ways are my ideas, but in fact, they are from my senior pastor. God has blessed me with an incredible relationship with my senior pastor. We get along very well. Him and his wife serve in children's ministries. They come to kids camp. They serve as grandma and grandpa at our statewide kids camp. They love greeting at our children's ministry events. They're phenomenal greeters, getting to know people. They dress up for events and things like that. And we have a great relationship, the things he shares with me, the things he talks with me. But it's not because we have a lot of things in common. We actually don't have a lot of things in common at all. We argue about a lot of interests. We don't have a lot of similar interests. We don't have a similar upbringing. We don't lead the same, actually. We do ministry different. And there are probably moments when I'm causing him to pull out his hair and vice versa because we do things very differently. We're actually very polar opposites. So it's none of those reasons why we have that great relationship. But I would say one of the main reasons, the key reason our relationship is the way it is because of trust. And the first thing I would say to you as far as building honor and serving your pastor is to be trustworthy. To be trustworthy. The short way to put that is do what you say you're going to do. If you want to serve your lead pastor, if you want to show honor to your lead pastor, be trustworthy. There's no better way to building trust than to do what you say you're going to do, than to keep your word. We all know people in our life that we trust. We all know people in our life that we don't trust. And it's all based off of that one concept that, they never get around to doing what they say they're going to do. Oh, they never back up. They never keep their word. They say they're going to commit, and then they don't. And we know those people in our life that are like that, but we also know people that we can turn to when we know we need something done. And that's the type of person your pastor needs on their staff. Here's some tips. Be on time. Do what you say you're going to do. Take notes. When your pastor's talking, don't be looking at your phone, which is a tough one for all of us to do because your lead pastor may be of a different generation. We're so used to holding a conversation and texting somebody else and cruising Facebook at the same time. And for us, it's common knowledge, and we don't get offended by that. But if your lead pastor's from a different generation, that might be tough for them to handle. That might be tough for them not to look at your eyes when they're having a conversation with you. Admit your mistakes. Own up to your mistakes and say, Pastor, I was wrong. This will not happen again. And tell him or her your mistakes before him or her finds out about them, so they don't get told by somebody else. In other words, when it comes to trust, be the staff member for your pastor that you pray for in a volunteer. Be the staff member for your pastor that you pray for in a volunteer. We all want trustworthy volunteers. We all get on our knees and say, God, send that one person to make this happen. Well, you know what? Be that person for your pastor. So when you're in staff meeting and your pastor needs something done quickly and needs something done right, they naturally look to you because they can trust you. Be trustworthy. You want to serve your pastor? You want to show honor to your pastor? Be trustworthy. The second thing I would throw out there is to be teachable. To be teachable. Your pastor doesn't need somebody who has all the answers. Your pastor doesn't need somebody who is so stubborn, they'll put their foot down and they know they're right and they're going to keep their way and they're not going to change the way they're doing things. Your pastor needs somebody who will be teachable. In the summer of 1986, there was 2 ships that collided in the Black Sea off the coast of Russia. Hundreds of passengers died as they were hurled into the icy waters below. News of this disaster was further darkened when an investigation revealed the cause of the accident. It was not technology problem like a radar malfunction or even a thick fog. The cause was human stubbornness. Each captain was aware of the other ship's presence. Both could have steered clear. In fact, both communicated to the other ship to change course. But each was too proud to yield first. And by the time they came to their senses, it was too late. And hundreds of people died. We don't need to be the staff member that knows that we're right and puts our foot down and is unwilling to budge. Having that grittiness in your personality is a great thing. That you don't back down in the face of adversity and things like that, that's a great quality to have. But when it comes to staff relationships and when it comes to your relationship with your senior pastor, you don't need to be that person all the time that knows you're right and you're willing to stand your ground and to come to your defense. Your pastor needs somebody who's teachable. I know I can recall a moment with my senior pastor when I don't remember what we were discussing in staff meeting, and I don't seem to have a problem disagreeing with my senior pastor in public, which is something that the Lord continues to teach me about and show me and reveal in my heart some areas. And so, but my senior pastor is great. He's not opposed to, he invites other ideas and disagreement in staff meeting and things like that. And I remember one staff meeting where he had an idea and I had an opposing idea. And I was pretty strong about my opinion. And I could tell, looking back at it now, his whole demeanor changed in the meeting. And he shut down. And he was done discussing that topic. And we didn't move forward with that. We didn't change anything. I was frustrated, and I found myself later that day in his office. And it wasn't a meeting I scheduled. And he just flat out rebuked me. And he said, Dan, your idea was great. And in fact, your idea was better. And we should have gone forward with that. But I'm going to tell you why we didn't do it. It's not because your idea was right. It's not because your idea was wrong. Your attitude is wrong. And the way you presented it and the way you delivered it was wrong. And I can't have you doing that in staff meeting. And he knows the strength of my leadership. He knows the strength of my communication and he knows how forceful I can be. And he's like, you can't deliver it in staff meeting like that. If you've got ideas, I welcome them. But it can't trump just everything else in the room. And at that moment, I had to completely retract. Instead of standing my ground and saying, but Pastor, we all knew this is the right thing to do, I had to immediately back off and say, Pastor, you're right. And I'm sorry. And in that moment, I gained trust with him, and I showed him I was teachable. And he has recalled that moment more than once to me. He said, Dan, I remember at this moment that, and you did not defend yourself. You immediately backed off, and I appreciate that. And he has recalled that with me more than once. And in that moment, I showed to him my teachability. I wish I could say it was every moment that I showed my teachability, but it was at that moment. I also gained trust with him in that moment. We need to be teachable. We need to show our pastor that, hey, I know you have wisdom and experience beyond what I have, and I know God has called you to this church, so I'm eager to learn under your leadership. Your pastor needs somebody who's trustworthy. He needs somebody who's teachable. And the third thing I would say is to be a team player. Be trustworthy, be teachable, be a team player. You may be rocking it, you may be hitting home runs week in and week out, but it's not about your ministry, it's about the church. And is the church as a whole growing? Is the church as a whole healthy? And if not, how can you step up to the plate and make something happen for the team? There's a famous Hall of Fame baseball player from the Pittsburgh Pirates, Ralph Kiner, played in the 40s and early 50s. And for 6 seasons in a row, he led the National League in home runs. And after one of these seasons, he came to his manager after hitting 37 home runs and leading the National League. And he came to his manager, Branch Rickey, and he asked for a pay raise. And his Coach Rickey, refused. And he replied to him, he said, "Coach, I led the league in home runs." And the coach replied to him, "And where did our team finish?" "Well, we finished last place." And the coach responded, "Well, we can finish in last place without you." We can finish in last place without you. You know, your ministry may be doing great, and that's awesome, but it's not about your ministry. Yes, you are in direct leadership of your ministry, whatever ministry that is, and you are responsible for that area, but you have to understand that your pastor is responsible for all the areas in your church. And he's not just thinking about kids ministries. She's not just thinking about kids ministries or worship. They're thinking of all of them. They're thinking of the worship and the youth and the hospitality and the follow-up and the kids ministry and all these things. And if there's an area that's weakest, you know, we use the phrase, "You are as strong as your weakest link." And it's not about pointing fingers at that staff member and say, they better get going, they better shape up, they better get on the train here because we got to move. It's about going to them and saying, what can I do to help? Pastor, how can I be a team player? What is it that's bogging you down that I can step in and release you so that you don't have to worry about this area? You know your pastor's strengths and you know your pastor's weaknesses. Can you cover a weakness in this area without blasting it in front of the whole team saying, well, Pastor, you're not really good at this? But go to him or her and say, hey, can I help out in this area? It was maybe a year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, that Scott went to his senior pastor, who was they do a staff chapel service for their pastoral team. And Scott, totally in charge of kids ministry, has nothing to do with that area of their church and ministry and stuff, but also realizing all the things on his pastor's plate, was able to go to him and say, hey, I don't need to do the speaking, but can I help organize this staff chapel? Because Pastor Scott knew that it was valuable to his pastor, the spiritual investment in his team. He knew that it was valuable to his pastor, but he also knew that it was something that he could take off of his pastor's plate. And so he allows his pastor to speak at it, but he is the one organizing it. So this is an example of how you can practically be a team player. This has nothing to do with children's ministry, but it's showing his pastor, hey, we're going to do this as a team. We're going to win as a team. We're going to lose as a team. Your pastor needs somebody who's trustworthy. He needs somebody who is teachable. And he needs somebody who is going to be a team player. So what's your serve? How do you honor? What's your serve? How do you honor? Now, we're going to hear over the course of the next 2 days a lot of sessions on leadership and a lot of sessions on vision and kids ministry and how to be better. And this one necessarily isn't about how to be a better kids ministry leader, but let me leave you with this thought. Others will follow you in the same manner in which you follow your leader. If you need volunteers that are trustworthy, teachable, that are team players, that don't talk about you behind your back, that honor you when they're with a different crowd, that will follow your vision instead of chasing their own dream, if those are the volunteers you need and you're crying for, the first place I would look is, how are you following your leader? Are you serving? Are you showing honor? And going back to that previous session, Pastor Chuck said it all started right here. What's your serve? How do you honor? And if you will practice those things, the people that are following you will do the very same thing for you. Thanks.